It begins with silence, not the gentle kind that drapes over a sleepy village after the cows are tucked away and the hearth is dimmed. No, this silence is thick, coiled like a breath held too long. It stretches across the crooked streets of a once lively medieval town now choked by fear. Cobblestones slick with last night's rain glistened like old coins, untouched. Every shutter is drawn, every door double barred. Even the pigeons, once bold scavengers on the market square, seem to have vanished. You are standing just beyond the gates of this nameless town, the name itself stripped from signposts as if to protect it from memory. Your cloak is damp from the mist that clings low to the ground, curling round your boots like fingers. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolls not, the cheerful chime of the church tower, but a dull, uneven clang. You recognize it. A plague bell. Someone has died. Again you step forward, not quickly. No one hurries anymore. The streets used to echo with life, bakers shouting prices, children chasing wheel hoops, the thwack of linen against washtubs. Now, even your own footfalls sound like an intrusion. You pass a well. It's been boarded shut. The water turned bad last week, they say. Or was it the week before? Time has a habit of fraying at the edges when every day feels like a vigil. On the corner, near the shoemaker's stall, there's a wooden poke rudely nailed with a thick, tarred rope. You look away. You already know what's hanging there. A red cross, hastily painted on a scrap of door. The house is marked. No one goes in. No one comes out. Behind the shuttered windows, you can almost hear the creak of a floorboard, the rasp of a breath being drawn too shallow. Somewhere in that house, someone is waiting to die, or watching someone else do it, and still they wait. Because the thing about plague isn't just the blackened boils or the fevers that crack the spine. It's the waiting, the silence before the bells. You move on, just beyond the apothecary long since abandoned, its shelves raided for every dried root and curdled tonics, a small chapel. The door is ajar, its hinges protesting softly in the wind. You step inside, and the scent hits you. Not incense that ran out weeks ago. It's the heavy, cloying smell of melted beeswax, unwashed wool, and too many bodies breathing the same sour air. A few candles still flicker, tongues of flame licking toward the rafters like they too want to escape. There are maybe 10 people here, all scattered, all quiet. A friar whispers a prayer near the altar, his voice too low to understand. You catch only fragments, something about mercy, about forgiveness, about the end. You sit near the back, not because you're ashamed, but because it feels wrong to get too close. No one touches anymore. No one dares. On the wall behind the altar is a painting. You remember when it was new, vivid, bright, full of gold leaf and hopeful angels. Now the angels look tired. Their eyes have faded, their halos dulled. Even heaven seems weary of watching. A girl beside you shifts. She looks no older than 15, but her face is already drawn with the kind of lines grief carves early. She's holding something wrapped in linen. You realize it's a doll, her sister's, perhaps, or her own. Her hands tremble. You look away. You're not here to make sense of sadness. You're here to remember, because before this silence, there was noise. You used to live in this town, years ago, when it was just a spot on the pilgrim's map, known for its cider and midsummer fare. You were an apprentice scribe then, copying tax rolls by candlelight, scratching ink into calfskin parchment while the old master coughed behind you. You hated the cough back then. Now you'd give anything to hear it again. The plague came fast, not like a storm, but like rot beneath the floorboards. Quiet at first, a merchant's wife who took ill after market, then the innkeeper, then his boy. Rumors spread faster than the sickness, that it was the Jews, the lepers, the air, the stars. God's anger, the devil's whisper. No one agreed, but everyone blamed. The town built a bonfire of things touched by the dead blankets, dolls, even a priest's holy vestments. They burned for 3 days. Smoke curled into the sky like incense gone mad. You watched, wondering what scenes the fire could actually cleanse. Then the gravediggers came. They were cloaked in waxed linen, faces hidden by long-beaked masks stuffed with herbs and vinegar-soaked cloth. At first, people laughed at them, called them carrion crows. But no one laughed when the mass graves opened, and no one argued when the bell ringers walked the streets, pulling carts behind them. Bring out your dead, they would call. But the dead didn't always wait to be brought out. They climbed out themselves, or so it seemed. You remember when the baker's daughter wandered into the square in nothing but a shift, her eyes glassy, her arms covered in blackened swellings. She fell to her knees beside the fountain and screamed, until she COULDN, single quotes. No one went near her, not even her father. She died alone. Like most, you left after that. You couldn't stay. Some called you a coward, others begged to follow. But you were only ever meant to pass through this life like ink over parchment, leaving no real mark dot, and yet, here you are again. The chapel door creaks behind you. A young man enters, face pale, eyes too wide. He's carrying something, a pouch, a scroll, a vial. You can't quite see. He walks straight to the friar and whispers something in his ear. The friar's face doesn't change, but he nods. That's when you notice the bell. It hasn't stopped ringing far away, but constant now. A rhythm, slow and steady. Someone is dying, or 100 someones. It doesn't matter anymore. Death has become a fixture here, like the weather or the price of bread. The girl beside you stands. The doll falls from her hands, forgotten. She walks toward the altar, pauses, then kneels. She's praying, not for safety. That ship sailed months ago. She's praying for remembrance. That someone, somewhere, will remember her name. That she mattered. You rise, unsure why. You follow her. The friar is lighting a fresh candle. Its wax drips immediately, like it's in a hurry to die. He looks at you, and for the first time, you see something you hadn't expected. Not faith, not certainty, but exhaustion. And underneath it, the hollow echo of someone still trying to believe that the world has a story left to tell. He places the candle in your hand. You hold it, and as the flame flickers toward your face, you remember what your master once told you before his cough took him. Even in the darkest script, someone has to keep the ink flowing. The candle warms your palm. It's not much, but it's something. Behind you, the doors swing shut with a final sigh. Outside, the bell continues to toll. But for now, within these tired walls, a few names are whispered, a few prayers offered, a few lives, if only briefly, remembered. The silence holds, but so do you. The flame in your hand, trembles. It isn't the wind. The chapel is still as stone. No draught moves through the rafters. No breath dares disturb the wax-streaked air. Yet the candle flickers, as if the fire itself senses what you already know. That something outside is shifting. that the silence the town has clung to like a prayer is splintering. You turn toward the door. You hear nothing, but you feel it. That ripple through the bones of the floorboards. That weight in the air. Somewhere outside, horses. Not the cart-hauling, apple-munching beasts from before, but lean, unfamiliar ones. Shod hooves that strike the road not in procession, but in pursuit, fast. Trained. You know that sound. The watch has arrived. You set the candle down. Let the light fall where it will. The friar watches you, still pretending to recite from memory, but his hands are clasped a little too tightly now. The girl has finished her prayer. She looks up at you, her face unreadable, like so many faces have become in these months of careful blankness. There are no good expressions left, only endurance. Outside, the hoofbeats slow, voices now, boots dismounting, armor clinking. You catch a barked command, something clipped and Latinized. Not a local accent, not village men. These are city guards. Royal, maybe. Or worse, church. The friar meets your eyes. They're sealing it, he says, barely above a whisper. I heard rumor yesterday. It's happening sooner than we thought. You don't have to ask what he means. You've seen it in other towns. When the death rate rises past the priest's patience and the graveyard's edge, when the carts stop returning because the drivers can't be found, when the church bells toll more hours than the sun gives, the authorities come, and when they do, they don't bring medicine. They bring boards, chains. Fire. The girl clutches your sleeve now. You didn't notice her move. Her fingers are cold, far colder than they should be. She tugs once, not out of fear, but out of instinct, as if something inside her still recognizes the old ways. Adult equals safety. Proximity equals protection. But neither of those rules apply anymore. You lead her back to the pew, sit, wait, pretend. The doors open. They don't crash inward. No shouting, no drama. That's not how this works. It's quieter than that. More terrifying. 3 men enter. The first is tall, shaved head, wearing a heavy black robe edged with silver. Not a knight, worse a notary. The kind who signs declarations of quarantine. The second wears a red armband and carries a scroll. His face is forgettable. His boots are clean. The third is the only one in armor. He carries a sword, sheathed but visible. And visible is all it needs to be. By order of the diocesan court, the notary begins. This district is now under ecclesiastical quarantine. Movement beyond designated boundaries will be met with prosecution, up to and including cleansing. Cleansing, that's what they call it when they torch buildings with people still inside. No one speaks. No one protests. Not because they agree, but because this is how things go now. You wait, you listen, you survive, if you can. The friar rises, bows slightly. His voice is soft. This is a house of worship, he says. They've come for peace. The notary doesn't look at him. God recognizes containment, he replies. He steps past you. His robes whisper against the stone. The soldier lingers near the doorway, arms crossed, watching. They don't stay long. They don't need to. Their purpose is to announce, not enforce. Enforcement comes later, in the form of nailed planks across doors and ash lines drawn through the streets. And when you see the men with the tar buckets, you'll know it's over. The girl beside you trembles. Do you have a name? You ask. She hesitates. Anna, you nod. Say nothing else. What comfort could you offer? Outside, the bells have changed. No longer single tolls for the dead, but paired strikes the signal for border closure. Somewhere a cart is tipped. Somewhere a dog howls that the watch will stay till sunrise. You gather your things. Not that there's much: a rolled piece of parchment, a dull blade, a water skin that hasn't seen water in 3 days. You glance at the friar. Where are they sending the healthy, you ask? He smiles, hollow and humorless. There is no healthy, he says. Only the not yet. He isn't wrong. You leave the chapel with Anna at your side. The air outside tastes like copper. Fires are being lit, not for warmth, but for signaling. Smoke columns rise in slow spirals. You see one near the baker's, another near the bathhouse. Sentries stand at intersections, marking which roads are still passable. And then you hear it. The singing dot. It comes from the north end of town, near the tannery. A group, maybe 20 voices, raised in eerie, off-key harmony. You pause, so does Anna. It's a dirge. The penitents have arrived. They move like a tide, barefoot, robes smeared with ash, lashes bleeding from self-inflicted scourges. They chant as they walk, Latin phrases mingled with local dialect, a hypnotic blend of penance and madness. They believe the plague is punishment, that only blood can pay the debt. Some towns welcome them, others drive them out. This one has no strength for either. They pass you like ghosts, eyes glazed, mouths open in endless prayer. Some carry bones, real or carved, you can't tell. One child, maybe 9, drags a wooden cross behind her. It's almost too big for her hands. Anna clutches your arm. Will they stop it? She asks. You don't answer. You don't lie. They disappear into the south alley. Their voices fade. What they leave behind is worse, a silence now broken in all the wrong places. A dog barks near the old Guildhall. Someone yells. Somewhere a window shatters. The curfew bells ring. You turn back toward the east. There's an old mill there, long abandoned. You remember sleeping there once, as a boy, during the harvest fair. Back when there was a fair. Before the world turned inward. It's safer than the streets. The door hangs crooked, but it still holds. You wedge a broken beam across it and light. A scrap of oilcloth. The flame catches slowly. The room glows. Anna sits near the wall. She's pulled her knees to her chest. She speaks after a long time. My mother was a healer, she says. She used to grow lavender. Said it kept the sickness out. You nod. And where is she now? Anna looks at the floor. In the well, she whispers. You don't ask more. The fire crackles. You unwrap a crust of bread, stale but edible. Offer half. She hesitates, then takes it. Outside, the sounds continue. Not loud, not panicked. Just life, in the strange, stilted way it persists. A baby crying. A man vomiting. Someone reciting psalms too fast to mean them. You think of the chapel again. The candle, the friar's hands. You remember what your master once said during a winter famine. When they stopped lighting candles, the darkness doesn't grow. You just stop seeing each other in it. Anna finishes the bread. What happens when they close the gates? She asks. You sigh. They decide who gets to stay inside and who burns. She says it flatly, not afraid, just accepting. You don't correct her. The fire fades. You curl on the floor, cloak pulled over your shoulder. Anna sleeps beside the wall, curled like a sparrow in winter. Somewhere, a bell tolls again. But this time, you don't count it. You already know what it means. The sun crept slowly across the stone walls of the domus, casting elongated shadows across mosaic tiles as the day inched forward with a sleepy rhythm. Clusters of dust motes floated through beams of light, dancing silently above the woman's bed where her form lay curled beneath a thin linen sheet. Her back ached faintly from the evening spent performing, and her thighs still tingled from the friction of leather straps tied tightly in a patron's moment of overzealous affection. She stirred. Slowly a slave girl entered, silent and familiar, carrying a silver bowl of water perfumed with oil of lavender. She placed it beside the bed and knelt with practiced reverence. Without a word, the courtesan lifted her arms. Warm water was poured down her limbs as the girl gently scrubbed the sweat, oils, and perfume of yesterday from her body. Outside, the city of Rome murmured and clattered to life. A baker called out prices for warm loaves. The clang of the blacksmith's hammer rang in steady rhythm. Children's feet pattered in the alleyways, chased by their own echoes. Somewhere in the Subura, a pair of drunks still sang the same tavern tune from last night. Unaware, the sun had already turned its gaze toward them. But here, in the perfumed stillness of her quarters, time seemed suspended. The courtesan moved like a priestess, careful and controlled. Her beauty was an armor, but it was also a burden. Every freckle, every hair, every soft fold of skin had to be sculpted anew each day. The paint upon her eyes was her war paint. The jewelry was her shield. She dressed not for modesty, but for influence. A sheer tunic, dyed pale rose from crushed murex shells, shimmered as it slid down her oiled skin. Thin golden chains wound around her ankles and wrists. A collar of pearls draped across her collarbone, a gift from a senator whose wife knew nothing of it. By mid-morning, her body was readied and her mind sharpened. She stepped into the atrium, where incense curled in lazy loops toward the open sky. A platter of figs and honey awaited her. She ate slowly, peeling the figs open one by one, her fingers sticky with sweetness. Her gaze wandered to the courtyard beyond, where ivy curled around columns and birds nested beneath the eaves. And then came the voice, Domina. It was Marcus. The guard, not one of hers, but one assigned by her newest patron, a young magistrate with ambitions far too wide for his purse. Marcus stood by the archway in polished sandals, his face unreadable. He sent another gift. Marcus said. She did not need to ask who he was. The magistrate, Gaius Livius Marcellus, had grown increasingly obsessive. Flowers, gold, even a small caged lion once, meant to symbolize her wild soul. And now this, too. Nubian boys stepped forward, bearing between them a carved cedar chest. They set it down and opened it. Inside, velvet-lined, lay a diadem, amethyst and garnet, rimmed with filigreed bronze, to crown your mind, which outshines all queens, red. The note tied to it with a strand of her own hair. She smiled thinly. This was no longer flattery. It was possession masked as adoration. The same pattern. First, they praised her. Then they desired her. Then they tried to own her. She touched the diadem, but left it in the chest. You may return it, she said coolly. Marcus flinched slightly. He will not take it kindly. She looked at him then, for longer than usual. Marcus with his broad shoulders, sun-darkened skin, and a scar along his left brow that told of campaigns far from Rome. He wasn't like the others. He spoke little, but when he did, his words had weight. Then, let him be unkind, she said. He has no claim over me. The afternoon was spent preparing for another guest. A Greek poet this time, older and near blind, but with a voice like wine and a beard soft as fleece. He came with parchment and poems and words shaped like petals. She reclined on the couch beside him, listening as he spoke of stars, of Syracusan breezes, of islands where lovers became constellations. He did not touch her. He did not even ask to. He simply wanted to speak, and be listened to, and feel. For one evening, like his words still mattered. She poured him wine with a gentle hand, and when he grew tired, she helped him to the door, placing his scrolls carefully into his bag. As he left, he kissed her wrist in thanks, not as a man who bought her time, but as a man grateful for sanctuary. Night returned like a thick cloth draped over the city. The air smelled of olives and smoke. The lamps were lit in her chamber, and the girl-slave returned with warmed oil. For her back, she lay flat upon her stomach, allowing the girl's careful hands to press and stroke the soreness from her spine. Each knot was a memory, a merchant's embrace too tight, a senator's grip too rough, a magistrate's hunger too constant, and yet she endured, not with bitterness, but with calculation. This was Rome, power war masks, and hers was painted red and gold and kissed by every tongue but bitten by none. As the oil dripped slowly between her shoulder blades, she spoke to the girl. "Fetch me my ink and parchment." "Yes, Domina." Tonight she would write, not for any man, not for coin or favor, but for herself. She would write of the poet's island, of Marca's watchful eyes, of the diadem she did not wear, and the silk she did. She would write of figs and flame, and the strange sense of being everything and nothing in a city that devoured both emperors and slaves. Because one day, perhaps long after her name had faded from lips and tablets, her words might survive, whispered, copied, stolen, and shared like she had been. And maybe then she would not just be remembered, she would be understood, and Rome, the Rome that wore her scent and kissed her feet, would not be the one to claim her last, but the world she wrote down in silence, the world she had crafted, line by line, from a couch of feathers and a heart of iron. The moon had fled behind a curtain of cloud as the great palace of Al-Rahman drifted into its silent slumber. Yet behind one small door near the eastern gardens, sleep had not yet touched the eyes of its newest concubine. Anara sat alone on the low-cushioned bench, knees tucked beneath her, a silver hairpin still trembling in her fingers. The soft glow of the oil lamp painted her cheeks gold, but the air around her was thick with questions she dared not speak aloud. Earlier that evening, she had been summoned not to the Caliph, but to one of his wives, Queen Farida, not the eldest wife, nor the youngest, but the most quietly feared. Her beauty was like still water, clear and perfect, and all the more dangerous for the stillness. When Anara had stepped into the queen's chamber, it had felt as though she had entered a temple. All sounds seemed to hush around her, and even the handmaidens stood like stone. Farida had not raised her voice. She hadn't needed to. "You were favored for now," the queen had said, voice like honey dipped in ice. "But the Caliph's heart is a fickle garden. Today he plants roses. Tomorrow he may burn the soil." Anara had bowed her head, hands trembling. "Slightly, I seek only to serve. And if serving means dancing on daggers, child, would you still wear that smile?" Anara had not answered then. She hadn't known how. And now, with the stars hiding and the palace stone cooling beneath the hush of night, she still didn't. The sound of footsteps stirred her from her thoughts. soft, spurred. Her heart jumped, for footsteps at this hour could mean many things. A summons, a warning, or something worse. But it was not a guard. It was Lena, her friend among the concubines, whose eyes always carried too much knowledge for her age. "You're awake," Lena whispered, stepping into the room like a breeze, and closing the door softly behind her. "I thought you might be." Anara said nothing, merely offered her a small nod. Lena crossed the floor, then sank beside her. She smelled of rosewater and cardamom. Her sleeves were damp with lavender oil, as if she'd been helping prepare another girl for the caliph. "Attention, I heard," she murmured. "Farida spoke to you." Anara stiffened. "How?" Lena smiled faintly. "Walls speak in this palace, Habibdi. But you already know that, don't you?" She did. "Why does she fear me?" Anara asked at last, voice small. "I am nothing yet." "Exactly," Lena said. "And nothing can grow into something. That's what scares them." The silence stretched between them like silk thread. Thin, delicate, ready to snap. Then Lena added, "You should be careful, but not afraid." Anara looked over, surprised. "There's a difference." "Oh yes," Lena whispered. "Fear paralyzes. Caution sharpens." Then, with a sly little grin, she nudged Anara's arm. "Besides, the Caliph has noticed you more than once. That's a kind of power, even if it's borrowed. Just don't lose yourself in it." Before Anara could reply, a knock sounded at the door, low and deliberate. Lena froze, her gaze flicking to Anara in alarm. Another summons. Anara stood slowly, tucking the silver pin into her hair with practiced grace. Her heart pounded like a wild drum, but her hands did not shake. She opened the door. A tall eunuch stood waiting, head bowed. "The Caliph requests your presence in the eastern chamber." It wasn't the main bedchamber that surprised her. She followed him through silent halls, her bare feet brushing cool marble, past mosaics of birds in flight and fountains murmuring low secrets. The palace at night was a different world, less golden, more shadowed, like a dream someone had left half-finished. The eastern chamber was smaller, intimate, less a throne room, more a sanctum. The air smelled of oud and orange blossom. Low cushions surrounded a shallow fountain in the center, and beside it sat the Caliph himself, not robed in finery, but in a simple linen tunic of white and silver. He looked up as she entered, and for a long moment said nothing. Then, softly, "Do you like poetry, Anara?" She blinked. "Yes, my lord." "Good," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "Because tonight I do not wish to be king. I wish only to be a man who once knew how to speak in verses." She lowered herself onto the cushions, heart pounding, unsure if this was a trap or a test or something else entirely. The Caliph smiled, weary and warm. "They all think I am made of marble, that my soul is a book with only one page. But you looked at me yesterday as if I was still being written." Anara did not speak. She didn't know how. He picked up a folded scroll and handed it to her. "Read." Her fingers trembled slightly as she unrolled it. The verses were in his own hand, restrained, aching with restrained fire. "Beneath the fig tree I dreamed of flame, not fire of war, but a burning name one whispered once, and never again. What is a kingdom to a single gaze?" She looked up. He was watching her, not as a sultan, but as a man hungry to be known. "I wrote that the night I first saw you," he murmured. She should have been frightened. Instead, she felt oddly grounded, like a branch finally aware of its root. "I am no muse," she whispered. Perhaps not, but you are a mirror, and I have not seen myself clearly in many years. For a while they sat without speaking. The fountain's gentle burble, the rustle of the breeze through the high lattice windows, the perfume of gardenia and jasmine carried by night's breath, all of it held them in a moment outside time. Then the Caliph said, "Tell me of your life." Before all this, she hesitated. No one asked that, not genuinely. "I was a merchant's daughter," she said quietly. "We sold silks and dyes near the coast. My father loved color. He said every thread had a voice, and if we listened closely, it told us who would wear it." He chuckled. "A poet in trade." "Yes," she smiled. "He would say, gold thread for the proud, indigo for the secret keepers, and red silk for the brave." The Caliph's gaze softened. "What color would he choose for you?" She didn't pause. "Silver, for those who reflect light." His eyes glittered. "You speak like someone who sees the world in layers." "I do," she said. Silence settled again. Not uncomfortable, but rich. After some time, he stood. She followed suit, uncertain if the night had ended or merely begun. "You may go," he said at last, though his voice held a reluctance she hadn't expected. She bowed low, and as she turned to leave, he added, "Enough." She looked back. "Beware the ones who speak softly but strike like silk cords," he said. "This palace is full of beauty and venom." She nodded once, understanding far more than his words revealed. As she walked back through the moonlit corridors, her heart was no longer uncertain. It was steady. A part of her still trembled. Yes, but another part had grown sharper, stronger. She had seen the man behind the crown, and now others would see her differently too. She would have to dance carefully, but she was no longer afraid, only ready. And now, as the faint gold of pre-dawn slips over the eastern sky, the air begins to shift. The stillness that once cloaked the city like a warm linen blanket stirs with subtle motion, like papyrus leaves brushing against each other in hushed tones, like a whisper traveling softly down the Nile. Somewhere in the temple courtyard, a clay vessel is lifted and carried. The soft pat of footsteps on stone blends with the low hum of a distant chant. Our scribe, Kamat, lies still upon his mat, wrapped gently in the cool cotton of his linen robe. His breathing is steady, like the ebb and flow of the sacred river. His mind lingers in that quiet threshold between sleep and waking. He is not yet in the world of duty, but he is no longer lost to dreams. He hears the first sounds, the murmur of the house servant lighting the small oil lamp, the gentle sweep of reeds brushing dust from stone. The day has not yet begun for the city, but for scribes. The day begins with silence, and so Kamat rises, not with haste, not with alarm, but with that practiced grace of one who serves not only the temple, but the rhythm of life itself. His hands reach forward, pressing gently to the mat, his knees folding beneath him as he stretches upward, vertebra by vertebra, like the sacred. Palm reaching toward Ra's first light, he washes, not in the Nile today, but in the cool basin, left for him near the doorway. The water is still, untouched, mirroring the faint line of light growing above the courtyard wall. He dips his hands, lets the chill kiss his face, runs fingers through short-cropped hair until it lies smooth against his scalp. No words are spoken. Even thought moves gently, like silk on skin. In this sacred quiet, he dons the robes of mourninger, fresh white tunic tied with a simple flaxen cord. The linen is soft with age, like the first chapter of a well-loved scroll. He smooths its folds and steps outside into the pale dawn, and there it is, the hush of the world, before its voice returns. The courtyard glows in a dusky lavender. The pool at its center catches the last of the moon's reflection, and papyrus plants sway without breeze, as if bowing in reverence to the coming sun. The temple cat, sleek and grey, watches from the shadows, tail twitching with serene detachment. Kamet nods to it as he passes. In this land, even the animals are part of the divine order, deservers of time's steady breath. He makes his way toward the scribal chamber. Along the way, he passes columns carved with ancient prayer petitions to Thoth and Mat, gods of wisdom and truth. The etchings catch the morning light like stories being reawakened, syllable by sacred syllable dot, and soon he is seated at his low wooden desk. The room smells of ink and ajav papyrus rolls and cedar oil of beeswax and soot. He breathes it in like a draught of life itself. Before him are the tools of his calling, the reed brush sharpened to a gentle point, the cake of carbon ink resting in its shallow dish, and the scroll he left half finished the day before. But Kamet does not rush. He prepares his space. First, he wipes the desk with a clean cloth, a movement slow and circular, as though polishing memory itself. Then he dips the brush once, twice, letting excess ink drip back into the dish before lifting the brush to the scroll, and with the ease of long ritual, the brush dances. Characters flow across the page like river reeds swaying in wind. His hand moves in quiet arcs, forming symbols that have passed through centuries untouched. He writes of tribute, of offerings received and counted. He writes of stars above the city and crops beneath the soil. He writes for the priests who will chant these lists before gods, and for the ancestors whose names must never be forgotten. Outside, the sun slowly crests the horizon. Light spills across the flagstones and climbs the walls, turning stone to gold, shadow to flame. But Kamet does not look up. He is lost in the music of lines and curves, in the breath of words taking form, and then a low hum rises from the temple hall. The morning hymn, it begins, not with instruments, but with voices soft, layered, rising, like steam from warm honey. The melody calls out not just to gods, but to time itself. A song sung by thousands of mouths over hundreds of years, each voice a link in a sacred chain. Kamet's brush pauses, his eyes lift, he listens, he does not sing, that is not his place. But he receives the music into his bones like a blessing. He closes his eyes, breathes, feels the weight of generations. Then back to the scroll. The work continues, but the air has changed. Morning is no longer a promise, it is present. The day has begun in truth, and with it the city wakes. From the narrow alleyways behind the scribe's chamber, market carts begin to roll. Their wooden wheels creak against the ground, echoing through stone. Donkeys bray, children chatter in low tones, their feet padding through sand. A fish seller calls out softly at first, then louder as confidence grows. The scent of baking bread drifts in barley loaves wrapped in date leaves, crisp at the edge and soft at heart. Somewhere a pot of lentils bubbles over flame, but here, in this quiet cell of wisdom, Kamet remains still. A single curl of ink winds across the scroll like a serpent, asleep. He pauses once more, wipes the brush, and stretches his hand. The ink has stained his fingers again. Faint black lines rest beneath his nails, tracing the memory of every syllable. He does not wash it off. These stains are sacred. They are the signs of a life spent in service not to gold, or glory, or even gods directly, but to the quiet endurance of truth, the preservation of thought, the shaping of story as the sun climbs higher. Kamet sets the finished scroll aside, letting it dry beneath a smooth stone. He lifts the next one, breathes, begins a new dot. Outside, the world grows louder. The bells of the temple chime. Priests in alabaster robes stride past, their sandals brushing dust. The temple guards adjust their bronze spears. Incense curls from clay bowls like smoke from a dreaming mouth. But Kamet is still dot, still as ink before the page, still as water before the oar, still as truth before it takes form. The warm flicker of a lamp curled shadows along the polished stone walls, and beneath the carved archways of the grand hammam, silence fell like a veil soaked in rosewater and steam. The sun had dipped beneath the golden parapets, and the palace, once alive with clanging trays and measured footsteps, now exhaled with a softness that only night dared to touch. But in the western courtyard, beyond the velvet drapes and silk-covered cushions, the concubines were still not at rest. Among them, Amira moved with her quiet steps, the fabric of her deep sapphire robe brushing the mosaic floors as though whispering secrets back to the earth. Her braid, still damp from the hammam's scented pools, clung to the nape of her neck. A eunuch had brought word from the chief attendant tonight. She would be summoned, but not to the Sultan's chambers, not to the bedchambers thick with incense and the hush of yearning. Tonight, she was to be brought before the Sultan's mother, Valid Sultan, a name that made even seasoned governors bow twice. No other woman in the palace commanded such delicate terror, and no other woman knew how to wield power beneath smiles, carved from porcelain and glances that could freeze the spring wind. Amira's heart was steady, but it beat with the knowledge of consequence. The Valid Sultan summoned rarely, and when she did, it was never without purpose. She passed through the marble corridors with her gaze lowered, her mind reciting every etiquette drilled into her during the long months of training. 1,000 rules for speaking, for standing, for silence, for bowing not too deep, not too long. Even the position of her fingers mattered. 2 guards opened the heavy gilded doors to the Valid Sultan's salon, and a eunuch guided her forward. There she was, Valid Sultanin, a her-backed ivory chair, her robe of peacock green spilling around her like a throne of silk. Her veil was fine lace, and her hands were adorned with old Ottoman rings, rubies and emeralds glowing faintly in the lamp's light. She did not look up at first. Instead, she gestured to the silk cushion on the floor before her. Amira lowered herself without a sound. For a long while, neither spoke. Only the soft breeze from the latticed windows stirred the quiet. "You are Amira of Samarkand," came the voice at last, soft but sharp at the edges. "Yes, Valid Sultan," Amira answered, with the grace of restraint. "You were not raised among nobility." "No, Valid. My father was a spice merchant. And yet you hold yourself like a woman who has been trained among empresses. My teachers here are unmatched, Valid." A faint, unreadable smile touched the older woman's lips. "I have seen the way the Sultan looks at you," she said, as though speaking of the weather. "You've caught his attention, but attention is not affection, nor is affection security." Amira remained still. The air between them had thickened. "Do you think a single night can change your station?" Valid continued. "Many girls believe that That beauty is a currency that will not rot. That favor is love. That one dream, if pressed hard enough, will sprout into reality. But the palace eats such dreams and feeds them to the stones beneath your feet. Amira dared a glance upward. The older woman's eyes were steady, pale as the sky before a storm. You are not like the others, Valid murmured, almost to herself. You do not chase, you wait. That is dangerous. Amira bowed her head slightly. I do not seek danger, Valid. No, the Valid said, rising slowly, her frame wrapped in centuries of history. But danger will find you, especially when the Sultan begins to whisper your name to the wind. She moved toward the window, her silks barely rustling. You will be summoned again, she said, not turning back, this time to his chambers. But remember this: every pleasure in the palace costs a portion of your soul. Spend wisely. The eunuch appeared again, wordlessly beckoning Amira to rise. She walked out slower than she came in, and with every step back through the halls, her mind swirled not with fear but clarity. The Valid's warning had not unnerved her, it had sharpened her. In the concubine's quarters, oil lamps had been lowered, and the women were preparing for sleep. Some braided each other's hair, others whispered stories from their provinces, rivers, lost lovers. Amira passed them like a dream, climbing into her own bed without a word. She drew the sheer curtain across the frame and lay back, staring at the inlaid patterns of stars on the ceiling. She did not think of love. She thought of the map that was slowly unveiling in her mind, of where each corridor led, of whose footsteps echoed at what time. She thought of the hidden gazers behind servant screens, and the way the Sultana's smile was never real, not even when speaking of silk imports. In this palace, survival did not depend on sweetness. It depended on awareness. 3 days passed. On the 4th, just after evening prayers, a eunuch came again. He bowed, his gold-embroidered tunic stiff and immaculate. The Sultan requests your presence. Amira rose without hesitation. This time, she was draped in robes the color of dusk, deep violet, with threads of silver and tiny pearls that shimmered like dew. Her hair was coiled and perfumed. A light oil brushed across her collarbones and wrists. She was not decorated like a bride, nor plain like a servant. She was poised like a question unanswered. She walked silently behind the eunuch, past the gold fountains and arched gardens, beneath lanterns swinging in the wind. The Sultan's private quarters were quieter than she expected. He stood at the window. When she entered, dressed in a simple kaftan, his crown absent, he turned only when she approached and bowed. Rise, he said gently. She did. He studied her in silence for a moment longer than comfort allowed. But Amira stood rooted, not with defiance, but with knowing. You are unlike the others, he said at last. The exact words Valid had spoken. Should I be like them? She asked, not with challenge, but curiosity. He smiled, and for the first time it was a smile that felt real. No, he said, not tonight. He moved toward her slowly, not like a conqueror claiming, but like a man seeking something long denied. His fingers touched her wrist first lightly, reverently, then traveled to her elbow. You've been trained in music, yes, yes, my Sultan. He gestured toward the cushions. Play for me. But not something they taught you here, something from before. And so she did. With trembling fingers she picked up the oud and plucked a tune born from the bazaars of Samarkand. a melody of dusk skies and jasmine-laden streets, of mothers singing over bread and fathers returning from dusty trade routes. He listened with eyes half closed, the weight of rulership falling away like petals from a tired flower. When the last note faded, silence reigned, and in that silence the Sultan moved closer, not with lust, but with longing, not just for her, but for a version of the world that felt human again. As the night stretched on, Amira knew her place was no longer uncertain, but she also knew it was no longer safe. For now, she was no longer unseen. She was remembered, and memory in the palace was a dangerous gift. The lanterns flickered, casting slow-moving shadows across the screens, and the petals of the plum blossoms drifted like feathers in a bowl of still water. Evening had settled like a careful veil over the palace, softening voices, melting outlines, making everything feel like a dream half-remembered. Chio sat on the polished tatami, her spine straight but breath slow. Her fingers moved with gentle rhythm as she stirred the inkstone, her brush poised. The poem she had begun in the quiet of the afternoon had waited for night to be born. Now, beneath the hush of dusk, she let the words return like swallows to a familiar rooftop, where silk moons fall on trembling pines, and shadows whisper through paper screens. The wind does not knock, but bows. Her brush paused. She looked out the open panel toward the lacquered walkways beyond, where she could faintly hear the rustle of sandals and the distant, muffled call of a bell dot. There had been no summons from Lord Hedatora that day. It was the third night without his presence, and though her duties continued, poetry, music, tending the scrolls and incense for his chamber, his absence was a silence heavier than sound. The other concubines had begun to whisper, as they always did when the Lord's attention shifted from one chamber to another. But Chio did not fret. She had learned, slowly and deeply, that a moment with the Lord was never truly possessed. It was borrowed from the world's tide, and like all borrowed things, it eventually returned to the sea. Tonight, however, she sensed something different. The garden was too quiet. Even the wind seemed to withhold its breath. When the door finally slid open, she did not flinch, though her fingers trembled slightly. The Lady Otek entered, not a concubine, but the attendant to the imperial steward. Her presence in the inner quarters was rare and never casual. She bowed politely, her thin eyebrows raised. "Lady Chio," she said gently, "the Lord Hedatora requests your presence, but not in the chrysanthemum wing. He awaits you by the pavilion of still waters." Chio rose with deliberate calm, but inside her a flutter of nerves stirred. The pavilion of still waters was not a place for indulgence. It was a site of reflection, used by monks and poets, and only rarely by the nobility when something delicate or grave required clarity. As she followed Otek down the lantern-lit corridors, past closed shoshi doors and silent courtyards, Chio recalled the last time she had stood beneath the pavilion's carved eaves. It had been months before, when she first entered the court. She had wept that day, alone and unheard, the bamboo floor cold beneath her dot. Now, as she stepped into the moonlight and saw the outline of Lord Hedatora beneath the pavilion's beams, she carried no fear, only questions. He sat in a loose robe of ink-black silk, his hair tied in a single cord, his eyes not on her, but on the still surface of the pond before him. "You came," he said, without turning. "I was summoned," she answered, folding to her knees beside the platform's edge. They sat in silence, the stars reflected in the water, quivering as dragonflies brushed the surface. Do you know, Hedatora said after a while, why the water here is always still? Chio listened. The wind stirred the pines, but the pond did not ripple. No fish, she guessed softly. No fountains. The reeds drink gently, and the stones are content. He smiled faintly. Exactly. Nothing stirs it from below. Nothing agitates it from above. It simply is. Another pause. Then he asked, "Are you content, Chio?" The question was more dangerous than it sounded. A concubine was not meant to speak of contentment. She was meant to serve, to soothe, to give, but never to possess the state of being content. She did not lie. "I do not seek it," she said. "I follow the moment. I serve beauty. I watch. And what do you see?" She looked at the pond, the dark sky reflected perfectly in its glassy depth. "I see the heavens beneath our feet." He chuckled, a low sound like fabric drawn over stone. "Still the poet. Only a mirror," she said. He looked at her then, truly looked eyes, not with hunger, but with something far more intricate. Curiosity, maybe even admiration. "You've changed," he said finally. Chio bowed her head. "Everything changes, my lord. Even still water, in time, becomes cloud." Another silence fell, not cold, not tense. It was the hush of a decision being weighed. "I no longer trust the others," Hedatora said. "Too many alliances, too many ears behind screens. But you," he hesitated. "You speak only to silence." It was both praise and burden that night. Chio did not return to the chrysanthemum wing. Instead, she remained beneath the pavilion. Her sleeping mat unfurled beside the lord's. He did not touch her, not in the way of desire, but asked her to read poems aloud until the moon shifted. She read from memory. Her voice was soft as the tide. "In stillness, I wait for the tide to forget me, but it always returns, soft-footed and slow-breathed, wearing my name." He was asleep before the final line. She watched him for a long time, then turned her eyes to the pond, the stars, UNMOVING, the surface, undisturbed, but beneath it, everything dreamed. The moon had waned, thinned to a pale whisper in the sky. And yet, in the halls of the palace, her glow still lingered, woven into the gauze of dreams, draped upon silken bedding, and kissed into the quiet breaths of sleeping concubines. But tonight, Ofsana did not sleep. She sat alone beside the koi pool, her hands folded in her lap, and her eyes reflecting the glassy water. The sky above her was a tapestry of trembling stars. The air hung thick with the scent of lotus and ink. Tonight, even the breeze seemed to hush its step, for word had come. The emperor would choose, not just a knight's companion, not a favored handmaiden of laughter or leisure, but a consort of name, one who would be veiled and announced, written in the scrolls of lineage, robed in red and offered the lotus pin of permanence. Ofsana's fingers trembled slightly, not from hope, but from the weight of understanding. She had come so far from the trembling girl behind the lacquered screen. She had listened, watched, performed, and remained silent when silence was power. She had read the winds not just in poetry, but in the folds of robes and the spacing of footsteps in corridors. Beside her, Lady Yue walked, slow and deliberate. The older woman had been watching her with curious stillness in recent days, not with envy, but with something more dangerous, calculation. "You know he leans toward you," Yue said, her voice a breath more than a whisper. The peach blossoms fall where your feet pass. The maids speak your name like a charm. Ofsana turns slowly. Do you envy it, Lady Yue? The older woman laughed, soft and without bitterness. I envy no one. I was chosen once. I bore him a daughter no one speaks of, and my name was stitched in silk and then forgotten. There is more to being chosen than beauty and poetry. Ofsana dipped her head. Then what must one be? Empty, Yue replied, eyes glinting under the lantern light. Empty of need, of desire, of ambition. Only then can a vessel hold the emperor's will. Ofsana did not respond. Her heart, though trained to calm, fluttered at the edges of her composure. Because she was not empty. She had dreams that dared to pulse beneath her placid mask. Not for power, but for meaning, for permanence, for a name that would not vanish with the seasons. The morning of the choosing arrived, cloaked in silence. Number, music, no announcement, only a hush that descended like snowfall over the plum court. One by one, concubines were summoned to the jade pavilion, each draped in ceremonial white hair, coiled with pearl pins, faces stripped of paint, save for a single dot of vermilion between the brows. Ofsana walked barefoot over the white stones, her robe trailing behind her. She could feel eyes on her, the other women watching, not with scorn, but with something closer to farewell, as though they knew this was her passage, and they were already shadows in her wake. Inside the pavilion, incense burned in spirals. The emperor sat alone on a raised dais, his robe a deeper gold than before, embroidered with phoenixes that shimmered in the shifting light. He did not look at her when she entered. Instead, he gestured toward a low cushion. Ofsana knelt, spine straight, eyes lowered. She could hear her own breath like a tide in her ears. "Do you remember," he said, "at length, what you told me about shadows?" "Yes, Your Majesty. You said they are not absence. They are shape, memory, yes." He turned, finally, and his gaze met hers. There was something heavy in it, not desire, but thought. "You were born in a city of red stone, were you not, near the salt plains?" "Yes, and your mother died in the drought, and your father sold rice at the southern gate before the raids took him." She nodded once, controlled. He remembered. "I do not choose lightly," he said. "I do not choose often. My court is filled with beauty, and my days with cleverness. But it is silence that feeds me now. Yours is the silence of stone, ancient, patient, full of story." Ofsana lowered her eyes, though her chest thudded like war drums. "I wish to offer you the scarlet veil," the emperor said, "to name you as consort. Do you accept this burden?" She did not speak at once. She let the silence stretch, and in it, she imagined the girl she had once been, hungry, ragged, watching processions through the cracks in city walls. She imagined her mother's voice in the wind, and her father's rice scales tilting like sundials. Then she raised her head. "I accept." The veil was heavy, not in weight, but in tradition. Dyed with pomegranate, stitched with gold, it rested over her crown like a second sky. The ceremony was not loud. There was no parade, only the binding of the lotus thread to her wrist, the placing of the jade ring into her palm, and the lowering of the curtain between her old life and the new. The palace changed after that. The plum court grew quieter, not in fear, but in reverence. Her name, once a whisper, became part of the woven script offered at morning ritual. Concubines bowed when she passed, some with grace, others with clenched teeth. but none dared speak her name in vain. Lady Yue visited her once, offering a small orchid in a clay bowl. "Now you are a garden others must walk carefully through," she said. "But even gardens must root deep, lest the first frost takes them." Ofsana nodded, knowing the frost would come. The court was not a place of rest, even for those crowned with love. It was a storm in stillness, a sea behind painted walls. But she was no longer a reed in the current. She had become the stone beneath it. At night, she still walked beside the koi pond. The fish knew her now, gathering near her shadow, mouths opening as if to speak. She found comfort in their silent circles, their crimson scales catching moonlight. Like armor. One night, the emperor joined her. He said nothing at first, only stood beside her, arms folded, his robe brushing hers. After a long while, he asked, "Do you regret anything?" Ofsana turned her head, her voice steady. "Only that my mother cannot see this." He exhaled, long and low. "I had a mother once," he said, "but she saw too much. And that was her undoing." Ofsana reached for his hand. He did not flinch. Together they watched the koi, and in their mirrored faces, Ofsana saw the echo of something eternal. Not just love, but presence. Not just power, but memory. She was no longer a shadow behind a screen. She had stepped into the light, and it did not burn her. It crowned her. The morning sun, soft and indifferent, crept lazily across the walls of the compound, casting golden reflections upon the smooth, lacquered floors. Beneath the flutter of translucent silks and whispered sandalwood smoke, she stirred Socorro. Longer just a concubine by title, but something neither she nor the world could quite define. A presence, a shadow, a whisper carried between the old and the new. The scent of wet plum blossoms still clung to her sleeves, though the bloom had passed. In her dreams, she walked alone through a garden that no longer bloomed. Always alone, always barefoot, her robes heavy with a weight memory could not explain. She rose before the other women, the hush of her movements disturbing no one. The sleeping mats of the other concubines lay flat with soft breathing forms still curled within. The world had not yet awoken, but she had. Her sandals slid across the corridor like drifting paper, and with each step came the soft echo of things unsaid. Past the painted screens she moved, past embroidered panels depicting cranes, lilies, dragons locked in silent combatand, past the old bronze mirror, tarnished with time, where her own reflection seemed reluctant to meet her eyes. This morning, she did not stop to paint her face. She did not reach for powder or comb. Her hair flowed freely down her back in loose black ribbons. She walked to the outer veranda, where the roof sloped low, and the wind sighed gently against the eaves like a forgotten song. There sat Lady Koizumi. As always. The old mistress was still and deliberate, her back straight as the bamboo grove behind her. Her teacup rested, untouched by her side. Her eyes, unreadable as river stones, flickered towards Sakura with the faintest movement. "You come early," Koizumi murmured. The dreams were loud. Sakura replied. Koizumi tilted her head, the corner of her mouth folding into the smallest wrinkle of understanding. "You hear more than most. That can be a gift, or a blade." Sakura sat, the silence between them stretching out like silk on a loom. She no longer bowed when she sat before Koizumi. The old woman no longer expected it. Their relationship had grown past protocol into something quieter, stranger. "I saw him again," Sakura said softly. "Your emperor." Sakura did not nod. She stared at the blossoms that fluttered from a distant branch, scattered like pale ghosts upon the floor. He was dressed in mourning robes, she continued, but he was not grieving. He looked weightless, as though he had been freed from some cage. Koizumi's hand moved slowly, curling around her teacup, lifting it with precision. She drank, savoring the bitter green warmth. Perhaps he... Has he said nothing? Koizumi nodded. The most important messages do not come in words. The wind carried the scent of charcoal and pine sap from the inner courtyard. The lanterns had not yet been lit, but in the shadows beneath the roof, Sakura could see them swaying gently, as if to some rhythm only they could hear. Later that morning, the summons came not from the emperor, but from the Dowager Empress. A rare thing. Sakura stood before the threshold of the inner hall, her hands folded, her breath held still like a bird in winter. She had only seen the Dowager once before, a silhouette behind a painted curtain. Now, the curtain was drawn back, and the old woman sat in full view. Her hair, silver as the blade of a katana, was bound tightly behind her head. Her kimono was darker than morning, a black so rich it seemed to swallow light. Her gaze was surgical, sharp as glass, and beneath that stare, Sakura felt her lungs betray her. "I remember when you first arrived," the Dowager said, her voice like distant thunder. "You were trembling, like a doe too close to the blade." Sakura bowed, but said nothing. "I told Koizumi to watch you. She said you would not last the season, and yet, here you are." Her fingers, old and veined like river roots, rested atop a fan painted with foxes and falling snow. "You see more than you should," she continued. "That is not always welcome here. This palace feeds on ignorance. It fattens on illusion. But you," she leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing, "you peel things apart, and that can be dangerous." Sakura remained, bowed, her knees pressed into the woven mat-like stone. "I wonder what your dreams are telling you now." She was dismissed with a flick of the wrist. No words were exchanged as she left, but her heart beat so loudly she feared the walls might echo it. That night, beneath the flicker of oil lamps and the lull of unseen flutes, a shadow waited for her. Behind the garden wall, it was not the emperor. It was not a servant. It was the scholar. Takeda, his robes were dust-stained, and his hands carried ink that smelled of redwood and history. He looked at her not as concubine, not as ornament, but as person. "I shouldn't be here." The room was heavy with the scent of incense, not the kind meant to soothe, but the kind lit when something is ending. A slow coil of smoke drifted upward from the bronze burner beside the door, its trail bending toward the painted ceiling of the Empress's chamber. She stood still, her silken robe brushing against the polished tiles, eyes fixed upon the mirror, but not upon her reflection. The woman in the glass was no longer the one who had entered the palace years ago, young and uncertain, led by hand, into the gilded life of whispers, routines, and power hidden beneath petals. That girl was gone, dissolved into time and ceremony. The woman who remained wore a different mask, one painted with memory, with heartbreak, with clarity. Behind her, the eunuch shuffled gently forward, bowing at the waist. "His Majesty is waiting," he murmured, his voice like the hush of rain on stone. The Empress nodded. Her hair was drawn high, combed into the elaborate twin peaks that signified her station. Gold pins rested in the black strands like stars trapped in a midnight sea. Each step she took made the fabric of her robe ripple, a wave of scarlet and white embroidery stitched with cranes in flight and blossoms at peak bloom. Outside, The sky bore the deep purple of late evening. Courtiers and consorts whispered in corridors, rumors flitting like dragonflies. Some said she was to be stripped of power, others that the emperor was naming a new favorite. But the truth, like always, was quieter than gossip. It was simple. She was leaving, not exiled, not dismissed. Departing, the emperor sat in the private garden, behind the hall of lotus shadows. He did not wear his ceremonial robes, only a plain, white robe of mourning. At first glance, he looked like a monk barefoot, quiet, faded. But the crown of his lineage was unmistakable, and so was the weariness in his eyes. She knelt before him without a word, as tradition demanded. He did not look up for several breaths. Then he spoke. "You knew before I did, about her." "Yes," she replied calmly. "And yet you said nothing." "There was nothing to say. A new flower blooms in every season. Some are destined to fall." The emperor's jaw tightened. "You make everything sound poetic. That is the only way I've survived." The silence stretched between them like silk being slowly pulled across stone taut, elegant, ready to snap. Crickets began their chorus in the grass. Finally, the emperor placed a letter before her. It was sealed in white wax, the imperial emblem pressed deep. "You are to be transferred to the Southern Temple of Enlightenment. As High Priestess, you will not return to the palace." She bowed again, the motion fluid, graceful, yet firm. A reply, not of submission, but of acceptance. The temple was not a punishment. It was a Havana, soft exile wrapped in silk and smoke. She would preside over rituals, oversee the training of noble daughters, and live in silence, surrounded by ancient stones and incense trees. But her voice would still echo in the corridors of influence, and she knew it. He looked up at her finally. "Do you hate me?" She met his gaze without blinking. "No, but I no longer dream of you." That answer stilled the air between them, he said. Nothing more as she rose, her sleeves billowed like wings. She turned without farewell, her feet silent on the garden path. She did not look back. By morning, the palace would wake to her absence. The concubines would shift in rank, the empresses, residence given to another. Her name would not be spoken aloud, not in court nor in chamber, but it would live in quiet places, the servants who once dressed her, the guards who opened doors at her nod, the young girl who once glimpsed her and wondered if a woman could hold that much silence in her eyes. She left the palace by the east gate, where no farewell processions were allowed. Only one attendant walked beside her, holding the umbrella against the soft drizzle that had begun to fall. The path to the temple was long, winding through forests and mountains, but she did not feel lost. At the first bend in the road, a soft rustle made her pause. From the trees emerged the young servant girl, the one who had once tended her scrolls, the one who had asked too many questions, the one she had once saved from punishment. "You shouldn't have come," the empress said softly. "I belonged to know." "One now," the girl replied. Their eyes met hand in that moment. The road ahead seemed a little less lonely. They walked on, side by side. Not queen and servant, not mistress and handmaid. Just two women beneath the endless sky, walking away from the place where names were traded like silk and truths were whispered behind lacquered doors. And far behind them, in the palace of 10,000 rooms, a red lantern dimmed. The empress had vanished like mist in early spring, leaving behind no scandal, no rebellion, only stillness. But in that stillness, something eternal stirred. Not silence, not sorrow, but freedom.